guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Kelsey. I'm the creator of Bite-Size Ancient History and a recent graduate of Cambridge University. This video is part of a series where I talk about the historical fact and fiction behind your favourite TV shows and films. Specifically, I look at ancient historical content because I studied classics at undergraduate level and then Egyptology at master's level. And today we're going to be talking about the second episode of Moon Knight. I'm uploading weekly videos to cover each of the new episodes, so if you missed the first one or my discussion of the trailer, don't forget to go check that out. This is where I'm also going to say that major spoiler warnings ahead. If you haven't watched the episode yet, you might want to go watch that first and then come back to this video. If this sounds like the kind of content you might be interested in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my other Moon Knight videos and other historical television shows and film reviews. Also, if you're generally interested in fun historical content, don't forget to check out all of my other socials. So, without further ado, let's get into it. If you've been keeping up with this series, you know that I am a massive Marvel fan and Oscar Isaac fan, and again, this episode did not disappoint. I was on the edge of my seat and I really enjoyed it. So anything I'm about to say that might critique its historical or mythological accuracy is not a critique on the show. I am very much aware that to make interesting content, you often have to stretch your inspiration, and that's what makes good TV. Presuming you've watched this episode, I'm not going to give so much of a plot summary in this video. I have in other ones, so if it is something you still want, comment it down below and I can do it in future ones again. But I thought we might as well just get into the nitty-gritty detail. In this episode, we start to learn a little bit more about Steve and Mark Spector. We learn that Mark is acting as the avatar of the god Khonshu. But what does this really mean? The actual definition of an avatar is the bodily or corporeal form of a deity on Earth. And that's what we see in the TV show. However, is there any Egyptian mythological backing to this? So, not exactly. We don't have this full concept of an avatar where somebody is basically, in an essence, possessed by the deity while still functioning as their own person. However, there is some inspiration behind it, which again is why I think the series is quite clever, because we're not miles away from the truth. We're just tweaking it a little bit. For example, Egyptian gods took on many different forms and different bodies, which kind of is similar to this idea of an avatar where they're possessing another body. In Egyptian mythology, for example, if we take the god Khonsu, he was literally a manifestation of the moon. He had a human form and a falcon form, occasionally also a baboon form. So we see that they're changing their bodies and their appearance almost like an avatar. More closely, we also have this idea of sympathetic magic in ancient Egypt. And this appears with kind of sacred jewellery or rituals where the priest or the actual patient is standing in the role of a deity in order that they might possess that deity's powers. So they're not specifically being used by the deity as an avatar, but they are sympathetically manifesting their powers and their narratives. So specifically in things like the daily ritual or other religious rituals, they will recreate a godlike mythological narrative in a mortal earthly realm within the temple in order to harness this power and guarantee its success. Thirdly, we also have many ancient Egyptian citizens taking on the name of a chosen deity, and this again is evocative of this idea of sympathetic magic. By us having the name of this deity, they ensure their powers and level of protection as a form of mini patronage. Just because they had this deity and dedicated themselves to it didn't mean that they were restricted to that one god. They could still worship others, but it ensured the help of specifically that one throughout their life. So again, pretty similar, just not quite to the same extent. In this discussion between Steve and Mark in the reflection, when we're finding out a little bit more about this arrangement, we also hear Steve repeat back to Mark, Khonshu, the god of the moon. Yes, this is a massive tick. As we covered in my earlier video, Khonshu is the god of the moon. And I'm sorry in advance if I keep changing my pronunciation, because you can call him Khonshu or Khonsu and sometimes just Khons. So much like his corporeal form, his name can also change. However, the TV show sticks with Khonshu, so I will try my best to also stick with Khonshu. As the god of the moon, he did have many roles, however. It wasn't just the moon. It was many connotations that come with the moon. So he also had epithets such as the defender, because the light of the moon at night was something that was considered to be protecting the citizens of Egypt from complete darkness and complete danger, because obviously it was a very dangerous place to live. Not only were people a threat, but also many dangerous and poisonous creatures. So with the light of the moon, they were slightly more aware and protected. So he was considered the defender or the protector. Not just this, but the moon also had the connotations of fertility, and this is most likely linked to the idea that you could visually see the passage of time as the moon changed its shape. So he was considered the protection of kind of childbirth and fertility amongst humans and animals. When Steve starts to run away, we also see Khonshu in his full glory again, and he's a lot larger than normal humans. And if you saw my review on Gods of Egypt, if not, go check it out, why haven't you? There is an issue here, is that a lot of films choose to depict the Egyptian gods as being these giants. Specifically in Gods of Egypt, like, they are huge. There's only maybe 2 foot difference, I'm gonna say, in this show. But I don't really know why, because in some depictions, yes, the gods do look substantially taller, but it's more about perspective and the way that the art was trying to communicate important figures. So for example, in burials, you'll see the deceased depicted kind of at the same height and level as the gods, because they're the focus of that burial. Whereas in temples and so on, you're more likely to see the gods being a lot bigger, like giants, because they're the more important figures. So our depictions in ancient Egypt aren't so much a photographic, true representation, but more a style of communication with whatever message they were trying to tell the viewer. Back at Steve's house, there's also a really cool Easter egg where you see a decoration in his room of this kind of disc. And this is a very real artifact that is currently being shown at the British Museum, I think throughout the whole of the summer as well. This is the Nebra disc, and it is being shown as part of the Stonehenge exhibit in the British Museum. And if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I definitely recommend you go check it out. So this is just quite cool. It's showing Steve as obviously being a history, archaeology nerd. The fact that he's working in an institution that is kind of a rip-off of the British Museum without being the British Museum, and just a generally cool Marvel Easter egg, which we know they're very good at doing. In the flat, Layla also makes a comment on the fact that Steve is learning French and hieroglyphs. And the fact that this is kind of a flex, and he kind of puts it down and says, well, it's not a lot. And this is kind of true, it's not that much of a flex. Like most of the scholars within Egyptology, where you're functioning as a full-on academic, will speak French along with German, because they're kind of needed for the articles that you read on ancient Egyptian archaeology or theory or anything like that. So it's really cool, don't get me wrong, it's an amazing achievement, and trust me, it's really hard, but it's also just a necessity. This is when I'm also going to take the time to talk you through the idea of Egyptian language, because I wouldn't be surprised if many people watching it who haven't studied Egyptology don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about Egyptian languages, plural, because there are many. And this also leads on to the fact that he talks about the fact that hieroglyphs isn't so much a language, but a form of script. So there are 5 phases of Egyptian language, which are obviously all slightly differ. There's a lot of overlap, so once you learn Middle Egyptian hieroglyphs, you can kind of wing your way through the other ones slightly. So you have Old Egyptian, then you have Middle Egyptian, and then you have Late Egyptian. And this corresponds with the earliest period of history, Middle-ish, and the most recent. You then have the later periods with Demotic and Coptic, and this is when we start to have foreign influences. But let's separate these a little bit. So Old, Middle and Late, you will have a hieratic script, which is more for your daily writing purposes like exchange and documents. And then you have hieroglyphs, which is your sacred holy script. So you find this in temples and in burials. The language itself does not differ massively. It's the way that it is written. Demotic then starts to change a little bit more, and this is after the late period, and it's kind of derived by forms of hieratic in the north of Egypt. You then have the last period where it's Coptic, which borrows a lot of the alphabet from ancient Greek, and this is because Egypt has now been taken over by the Greeks and then the Romans, so it started to amalgamate a lot more into a very distinctive language. While the alphabet is generally Greek, a lot of the grammar behind it is still ancient Egyptian. And that is a very brief summary. There is a lot more to talk about, and I do find ancient languages really fascinating, so if you want to know more, let me know in the comments down below. We also learned in this episode that our little scarab beetle amulet is used to try and point the user in the direction of Amit's EGYPTOLOGIST. What is a EGYPTOLOGIST? A EGYPTOLOGIST, or its earlier name of just Shabti, are the small figurines that we find in ancient Egyptian burials. There's a little bit of debate around some of them as to what their actual purpose was. However, some of them come with a handy inscription that explicitly says what they were designed for. And this is how we have the popular belief that they were basically miniature slaves to carry with you into the afterlife. So that when you're enjoying your afterlife, you don't need to do any tasks. Your slaves can do it for you. We're also later told that it's generally just to find Amit's tomb, and that makes sense because the EGYPTOLOGIST would be found in the tomb, so it helps us get to Amit. And I'm gonna predict that this is because we're trying to find Amit and resurrect the deity in some way. I'm not sure how it will work on the technicalities, but I can imagine that's where the series is going. So Khonshu and Mark Spector are trying to prevent this, while the rest of them are trying to ensure this happens. So Arthur Harrow also starts to slander Khonshu a little bit in this episode to Steve and inform him on what he's actually like. And the thing is, like I said, Egyptian mythology is so varied and versatile. You have to respect the series for acknowledging that in altering ideas, because it's what the ancient Egyptians used to do themselves. That's why we have so many varying narratives based on the same plot point. And that's what they've done here. So, for example, he talks about how he has temper tantrums. And I imagine that this is a narrative created from the fact that in depictions of Khonshu, we see him with the side lock of youth, which was used with Egyptian children to show their age. And temper tantrums, children, you see where I'm going. He also says how none of the other gods respect Khonshu. And while, again, there's no specific thing to pinpoint here, as I said in my previous video, in the pyramid texts, Khonshu used to eat minor deities to protect the king in his journey to the afterlife. So I imagine if we're going off that, he wouldn't have been very popular. We then also get into this philosophical debate on divine judgment and if you can intervene before or if you have to wait after the evil event. Because if you know it's going to happen, what's the issue with doing it before? But then also, can you truly know that that is going to happen and the person is evil? So Amit and her followers believe that you should intervene prior, whereas Khonshu thinks that you should have fair and justified retribution post-act. And again, there's not an exact thing to pinpoint here. As we know from my previous video, Amit was there to eat the deceased if they failed the weighing of the heart ceremony. And it kind of suggests in the text that she is very much not the one in control. She is just there as a vehicle for this destruction. And then Thoth, who is occasionally replaced by Khonshu in the weighing of the heart scene, is the one who makes the kind of decision and rules it, judging off other aspects as well. So I see where they've gone here, and although it's very rare depictions of this, it makes sense because we do see this clash a little bit where he's the one in control and giving the fair judgment, whereas she is just there for the chaos almost. And that is all we're going to have time for today, so I'll see you next week. Bye!